Hi, I'm James and welcome to another review. Today I'm looking at the Fractured role-playing game, Quickstart guide. Now this is published by Zero Sum Games and is actually available free of charge on their website for the Quickstart. I'll put a link to it in the description. It's called a post-apocalyptic role-playing game. It's got a background built into it, which I suppose is a very topical one at the minute. I'll talk about that in a second. It's a 12-page quick start guide, one of which is the cover. So there's not a lot there, but the amount of information packed in is quite impressive in all fairness. So the first page, section 0, is called A Fractured World, and it looks at the background to the game, which is basically a virus, dubbed the dog flu by the media it says, has wiped out 78% of the world's population. Technology has been thrown back to 1800s, society has collapsed, and all the old rules with it. Okay, it's obviously going to be a very depressing game in some ways. It gives all the background, it talks about things that have occurred in very, very generic terms. It's very much something that you can then, as the referee, pull together to cover that. So we get into chapter 1, the next page, getting started, explains what fractured is. It talks about terms and conventions, about what it means when it says 2d6 and things like that. And there's a little bit again talking about the world around and sort of how it is for the GM and so on. Now it uses their in-house rapid role-playing rule set, and it's not badly named. We go into then how to play, and it's got a very simple mechanism where you roll to try and achieve a task, and you basically are on 2d6 with some modifiers based on your ability, the skill, and any conditions. And basically a 1 or a 2 is a catastrophic fail, 3 to 8 is a fail, 9 to 12 is success, 13 to 15 is advantageous success, so you get something slightly more effective than you planned from it, and 16 or more is a wild success. And wild success is basically an advantageous success, but you also gain a bonus outcome dice. Now the outcome dice, you start with one of these. You can be used in various ways, but basically it adds to your roll. And so if you get a really successful roll, then you get another dice later on. So it's encouraging sort of the heroic side there. It talks about things like opposed checks, things like that, and they are fairly straightforward. Gives a nice overview of the character sheet, and I'll put a copy of the character sheet on the screen so you can see it. It's relatively well laid out, everything is in there, it's nice and simple. Some of the things aren't used in the Quick Start guide, but it's pretty straightforward. Attributes are on a scale of 1 to 6, with lame, weak, average, good, strong and excellent being the ratings, and these give a modifier. A rating of 3 gives no modifier, and then for each one different either way it's either a plus or a minus 1, so it's quite simple. We've then got the character creation, which to be honest in a little 12-page booklet is quite impressive. I don't necessarily expect that. I'd have expected a few pre-generated characters, but no, it gives you 2 different methods for generating your character. You've got the life path method, where you go through everything. Basically you come up with your character concept, you then look at what your character did in their formative years, you then go into their education, their professional development, their personal growth, what they do as a hobby, things like that, and a complication. So there has to be a complication such as a criminal past, outstanding debt, family obligation, on the run, dark secret, other obligation, addiction, daredevil, personal enemy, or betrayed. Now there's no rules for using that. This is designed, I think, for people who understand what role-playing is about, but it's a nice thought. You then do your secondary statistics, which are your wound points, your resilience points, defensive modifiers, your encumbrance and your morality. Now, morality is an interesting concept in the game. Unfortunately, that is as much as we know, that everybody starts with a morality of 3. The details of that are in the full rules. I was a bit disappointed. I was quite looking forward to seeing what that mechanism was, but that's a nice touch. And then you put together a bit of a backstory and sort of flavour for your character. So it's encouraging role playing. It's simple. It gives examples then of professions where you can what sort of skills you would get from being in those professions, and it also gives you some paradigms which are an alternative. These are basically a pre-generated character. The attributes are worked out, the secondary statistics are worked out, and your skills are all already done. So it's very simple. It gives a few different examples. You've got big city cop, emergency room doctor, field medic, mercenary, roadhouse owner, rural mechanic, small town sheriff, spook, a tech CEO and a trucker. Well, that's a pretty eclectic mix. I'm not entirely sure that a tech CEO is one of the major ones I'd have put in, but there's plenty of different ones in there. And of course the whole idea with it being a pandemic is that you can have anybody in this. The next page then looks at skills, and now the skills section, most of the skills are fairly straightforward. Interestingly, that's section 8, and it jumps from 5 to 8 and then back to 6. So I think that's been changed from where the original rules are. There's a set of skills, picking a few of them at random. You've got things like dodge, so lightning reflexes and the ability to be where an attack is not. Dodge adds to your defence. First aid, enough medical knowledge to stabilise and heal a wounded patient, care for most minor and moderate ailments and injuries. You've got things like inspiration, being able to motivate groups and individuals towards a goal. Ranged weapons, so adding to your modifier for attacking with ranged weapons. So it's quite a few different skills. And then you come to the combat, which they've actually managed to get down to two pages. Again, a full combat set of rules within that is fairly straightforward. So we start off with rolling for the initiative. Everybody rolls, and interestingly, unlike most games, it's actually rolled each turn, so you have to actually roll each time. As your character then acts, you get 2 actions, which can either be the same or different. If you do the same one twice, there is a modifier to succeed on it. And once everyone's done that, you move into the third stage, which is resolution, which just picks up all the end of round activities. So it's fairly straightforward. To launch an attack, you roll 2 dice and add your ability modifier, which is physicality for melee, dexterity for ranged. You add the skill modifier based on the skill of the weapon you're using, and any conditional modifiers. There's also weapon modifiers, and then you subtract the defense. If you get a hit, weapons do a variable and a fixed amount of damage. So for example, a rifle does 5 plus 1d6 wound points, so somewhere between 6 and 11. And you also do half of that in resilience damage. So you actually get resilience and wound points being deducted. If your resilience hits 0, then you're incapacitated. If your wounds hit 0, then you're mortally wounded and you're bleeding out. And you need somebody to come and sort you out. There's also a little note tucked away there about subsistence damage if your character's not eating. You've got called shots where you can actually call for a specific effect. You could try and, for example, shoot a gun out of someone's hand. It mentions that using a baton to hit somebody on the leg to slow them down, things like that. There's a section on getting the drop, so you can basically seize initiative from somebody. And this is the different actions you've got, which are things like aim, attack, covering fire. Like in many rules with this, you can't actually hit somebody by firing this, and you can't actually pin people down without using it. I think there needs to be a mechanism that covers the two, but it's not exactly an uncommon fault. You've got defend, ready your weapon, move, reposition, take cover, engage, which is this is the right, because you've got different ranges, and the ranges are quite interesting because it's a very abstract combat system. It's very theatre of the mind. You basically have different ranges: engaged, close, medium, long, and distant, and it's a relative distance. There's no actual scales or anything given, and basically you move between the ranges. It takes different time to move between the different ranges. It's fairly straightforward. The only thing I find interesting with this would be I can see there would be difficulties if I had two groups, one of NPCs, one of PCs, and they're closing on each other. Or some of them are closing to go to melee, some are staying back to shoot. Trying to keep track of the relative ranges might be very, very difficult. I'm really not quite sure how that would run. I sort of had a look at it and just tried, and I was getting very confused. Each of the ranges has got sort of modifiers for specific weapons. I think I probably just would create a little card with those on just to help me. But yeah, I think for small groups you'd probably find it fairly easy to keep track. You've also got a section on armour. Now armour does two things with this. It makes you harder to hit and reduces the damage. I'm not fully convinced with that as a mechanism. However, if you're not happy with it, you'd rather that the armour just reduced the damage or it made it harder to hit, whichever you preferred, you could just use the one set of modifiers because it uses the same modifier for both. But again, it's fairly straightforward. It is worth noting that sort of the armour they give, which is generally the improvised things that you'd expect to see, more Mad Max style than modern military equipment, it doesn't do a lot. The biggest negative modifier you can get is -2. You could add a riot shield into that to get a total of -4, but when you then realise that, for example, a modern military rifle is doing 10 plus 1 six-sided dice worth of damage, it ain't going to make a lot of difference. So yeah, fairly realistic, but I think it possibly needs a little bit of expanding. And then the last but one page is the weapons and equipment charts. They're all very generic. Don't expect to find Uzi or anything like that here. You're going to find things like heavy pistol, shotgun, that level. Looking at it, there is an interesting oddity I've just spotted in that it doesn't actually have a submachine gun in there. It's got a lot of other things, like some exotic things like flamethrowers are in there. All the traditional melee weapons that you'd expect to find are in there. Like I said, most of the ranged weapons are pretty sort of sensible. Doesn't differentiate between things like 5.56 and 7.62 rifles. Personally, I think I'd probably add to that, but it's a very easy game to do that with. The mechanisms are straightforward, and it's nice and simple. There are lots of little things tucked away. It took me ages to actually spot it, but tucked away at the top of the page is your starting equipment, where you get a primary and a secondary weapon, a survival kit and enough rations for 3 days, and 1d6 rounds of ammunition per weapon. It's, like I said, there's so much detail in there. One I spotted earlier on I think the third read through was that if you get the top end hit on a combat attack, then it's an automatic kill on the target. So yeah, this is probably going to take 3-4 readings to get everything out of, and there's a possibility you might miss something. There is so much crammed into these 12 pages. Now, something that did confuse me, and I haven't been able to figure this one out yet, is under the miscellaneous equipment it has things like binoculars, radios, medical packs and so on. And it says special qualities, and it's got 4 plus a number. I haven't yet, 4 plus 1d6 or 6 plus 1d6, I haven't figured out what that means yet. I'm assuming that might be number of uses. That's the only thing I can think of. It uses encumbrance values as well. there's some oddities with the encumbrance values, in that you've got a survival kit which has got an encumbrance of 1, gives you 1 week's survival. I'm assuming that means there's rations and things for a week there. You've then got a survivalist pack, which is uncommon, with an encumbrance of 0, that's got a month's survival in it. So it doesn't quite work out for me. I'm not quite sure what they are. So the equipment chart will probably need a little bit of expansion. That's not exactly surprising. It's difficult because in many ways I feel like I'm judging this against a full role-playing game. It's not. It's a 12-page guide. One of them is the cover, and then the last page we haven't mentioned is the character sheet, which is simple. It's nicely laid out. You could easily use this as it stands for a nice simple one-off adventure. You could play it in an awful lot of different settings. I know it says it's giving you the background of the plague, but it would work just as well in the sort of the Twilight 2000 type world after a nuclear war. It could be used in a Mad Max type future. It could be used. I say Mad Max future. It's 2021. That means Max is set this year. That really cheers me up. After 2020, anything could happen. There's a lot of different options with it. It's something I'm going to be looking at. I'm going to be keeping an eye on this. I'm going to be looking for the full version of it. I'm also going to be looking out for any sort of spin-offs from it. It does seem like it's a lot of effort is going to this. The design is nice. It's got a lot of information on every page. I'm guessing that the full version will be a bit easier to read, but it definitely is worth a look. It's a free download. At the end of the day, a free download just for the ideas is usually worth a look. So I have to say, look at it. It's worth trying, and I'd be interested to any feedback if you have run any games with this, how you found it, particularly the bit with the range bands. I would be interested to see how that works out. Hope that's been useful for you, and I'll see you soon for another review. Until then, take care.